Alafia. I'm Dr. Gloria Lattimore Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. I could actually listen to the theme song for this show forever. It comes from the Seven Principles album, and it was created by Kwame Steve Cobb and his lovely wife, Chavanduka. And the title song is Umoja. I love it, and I love my guest who's here. This is Masequa. I love to say your name, Masequa Myers, who is the Executive Director of the Southside Community Arts Center. And today we're calling this show Community Curator, the Southside Community Arts Center, because it is more than just an institution. It is a curator of the life and culture of the Southside community as well as the African community, I think, city, state, county, nation,
yes,
world.
Yes.
Okay, we won't stop anywhere. So I want to greet you, my sister, and tell you that I love the fact that I can talk about this. I can talk about the journey from Margaret to Masequa, and to look at a legacy being maintained and perpetuated because she left that legacy for us. So I want you to talk about your life now with Margaret, as well as the things that you knew that made you, let's say, a child of the Queen.
If not a grandchild.
If not a grandchild.
Yes, of the
right.
Queen.
Well, I'm going to get as close as I can. I'm calling myself a child of the Queen.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Queen granddaughter.
Yes.
All right.
I love that.
Okay.
And I love your opening. You said so many profound things about the relationship the Southside Community Arts Center has had with the community at large, and how the Southside Community Arts Center has been the forefront of giving us the status of art and culture of African Americans in this country. I met Dr. Margaret Burroughs as a teenager. My mother and father brought me and my two brothers to a home across the street from the Southside Community Arts Center in 1968. And we were just as amazed and fulfilled with seeing the African artifacts that Dr. Burroughs had begun to collect and keep at her home and share with anyone who dared to come see them. And so many people dared to do that, and we're so happy that they did. We know that Dr. Margaret Burroughs wanted to change the way that we as Black people looked at ourselves in this country. And we knew how important it was to feel good about who we are in this country, because we know we didn't start here. Our history and ancestry goes back thousands and thousands of years. But unfortunately, because of the Atlantic slave trade, we did not understand our connection to our roots, and Dr. Margaret Burroughs wanted that connection understood. And the Southside Community Arts Center was a place that I met some fantastic icons of the African American community, like Gwendolyn Brooks, like Hakeem Mahabuti, Val Gray Ward, Darlene Blackburn. So for a teenager, meeting those kinds of heroes and sheroes in our community really, I feel, shaped my life to the positive. And some people will say I've come full circle, because now I am the executive director of the Southside Community Arts Center. I have traveled the world to come right back to where I began, and I'm proud to do so, because it means that I can make a difference in young people's lives the way that Dr. Burroughs and other elders made a difference, a positive difference in my life.
You know, I love that. I love everything that you say, just stimulates me and stimulates thought. One of the things I want to cling to right now is when you said that she wanted us to understand our ancestral roots. and not to see ourselves as something that just like Topsy just grew. And someone who was writing a book, and I don't know if this person is still writing this book, sent me something to read because I was asked for some input. And one of the things that I saw that I stood up on was this notion that she came from humble beginnings to the stature. And I said, if there was anything wrong about that statement, Dr. Burroughs understood. She wrote the poem, What Shall I Tell My Children, of what it means. And she talked about going back into a way back time of kings and queens. So how do you say she came from humble beginnings?
Well,
Dr. Burroughs did not come. We as a
People.
did not come from humble beginnings.
And that's what makes the Southside Community Arts Center, in my mind's eye, so special. I tell, especially the young people that come to tour the Southside Community Arts Center, of its exhibitions, because we have 4 to 5 exhibitions annually, and that means that we display the work of African American fine artists at least 3 to 4 times a year. And my whole point is that young people can come into that institution and look on those walls and see images of themselves in their goodness and greatness, not in what the mass media or the so-called main media portrays of us too often, or the negativity that might occur in our community sometimes becomes what the media wants to display as normal and happens all the time. So to see the young people walk through those doors and look up on those walls and
And are
see
inspired.
images of themselves, and they're reaffirmed and they're inspired and they're motivated from a good place is of what monumental significance.
Right.
Monumental.
I could be your mother. And when I was taking my children, Dr. Burroughs was my art teacher. I don't tell that often because I did not become an artist, but my daughter did. So she saved face for me. I think that, however, I appreciated her and what she did. And consequently, when she started the museum in her home, I would take my children, my classes, on field trips to the museum. And my children, having been exposed to some of the other major museums in the city, would be somewhat curious as to why the museum was so small. But we had to start somewhere. And before she started that, we had nothing at all, nothing to remind us of our glorious beginnings. And so as far as they would have been concerned, these pictures in the social studies book that had people, adults in chains, walking down the gangplank of ships would have been the way they thought our people started.
Yes.
And so the fact that this gave them another image. And as it grew and grew, then they became prouder and prouder of what it became. But I credit Dr. Burroughs for that beginning. And also, as you talked about the influences, the people that you got to meet. Once, if Dr. Burroughs knew you, she invited you into her home, into her life, into her world. And consequently, you got to meet these people that you just named and other people, and it was commonplace, and you weren't name dropping.
No.
If you said that you had a conversation with Gwendolyn Brooks or Val Gray Ward or Marion Perkins or any of the other people who were her colleagues and her peers.
I think what we have to remember when we talk about Dr. Margaret Burroughs is the fact that she left us two magnificent legacies through the institutions of the DuSable Museum of African American History
Right.
and the Southside Community Arts Center. They are not the same, but they do service us in similar ways.
Right.
Because the museum is more concentrated on history,
Right.
and the Southside Community Arts Center is more concentrated on celebrating the art and culture of now.
Right.
Because we do want to make sure that our artists are
Right.
supported.
Right.
But the Southside Community Arts Center was started when Dr. Margaret Burroughs was only 23 years of age. She was one of the youngest ever to sit on the board of directors of the Southside Community Arts Center. And I always share that that means that she gave 70 years of her life to making sure that the Southside Community Arts Center would be sustained. And 21 years later is when she and her husband co-founded the museum, the DuSable Museum of African American History. So what I found out, and she didn't teach me art, and no, I'm not a painter, but I am a very creative person.
Of course.
And I went more into performing arts than I did the visual arts and the fine arts. However, what she does is more than speak to the artistry in us. It speaks to the whole being. It speaks to our cultural significance, and that goes and transcends through any occupation that one might decide that they would want to do with their lives, right? So it's just a wonderful, sacred place where people of African descent, for sure, can come and celebrate, as I said earlier, the good and the greatness of who we are. And that is what perpetuates more total and wholesome human beings, if we can focus on that which is good in ourselves.
Right, right. When I was at Northeastern Illinois University teaching, I wrote a proposal, and I was able to have some classes at the Southside Community Arts Center for some youth in the community. And I only was able to choose that place because that place was there. It was there when my children were growing up, and they went there and took dance lessons from Darlene Blackburn.
See?
So there were activities. It was not just an art museum where things hang on the wall and tour guides walk around and explain this to you, but this was a living place where people who had talent and skills could come and share those talents and skills with young people. And the interesting thing was, I had a large family, so it had to be affordable. If I was able to take my children there to have various activities, it had to be affordable. So it was affordable, it was accessible, it was there for us. And the icons, we didn't know what an icon was, but the people whom we later learned to value as icons were there doing this work for us and for our young people. And then when I became an adult and was able to have a proposal where we could have some classes for young people, I was able to do the same thing in that building because I had known the various aspects of the activities that went on in that building. It was not just that first floor, but there were floors above that first floor. Talk about some of the things that you're doing now.
Okay, I want to first address the fact that you mentioned that the Southside Community Arts Center is more than a fine arts center, and it's more than a museum.
Right.
Because we also are a multidisciplinary performing arts institution as well. So when people come now, their teens can have a full program related to acting, writing, directing, and production. So that is being done there now as well. We still have classes seasonally in painting and dancing, and our CAP, which is Chicago African American Alliance, Chicago Alliance of African American Photographers, still meet every Sunday at 2 o'clock. So when you look at the Southside Community Arts Center, you're right. It's energy. It's a living, breathing institution. It just feels like there's so much going on because it is. I know this particular weekend, we had over 500 persons walk through the doors of the Southside Community Arts Center because we have collaborated with other institutions here in the city to raise the profile of the Southside Community Arts Center so people know that we exist, still exist. And I say that because the Southside Community Arts Center was founded in 1940. So we're going on 77 years old. And that in and of itself is a feat because we're the only art center that is still alive after 110 art centers were started in 1940. So you hear what I'm saying. We have never closed our doors.
Right.
We have continued to offer our art services.
I've seen some of what you're talking about in her own autobiography.
Yes.
So I know you know whereof you speak.
Yes, and you talked about the building. The building, yes, is 3 stories with a basement. So when it first opened, we had people like Gordon Parks, who was teaching photography in the darkroom in the basement of the Southside Community Arts Center. And some people know him as the first African-American photojournalist for Life magazine. And then others know him as a film director because he directed Shaft in the 70s. I always tell the young people, not the one you just saw, but the one that came out in the 70s, the original film. And at that time, a lot of people don't know this, but that was the highest box office rated movie to that time, Shaft. And so that's another kind of historical fact that we could put in our hat by saying a job well done.
Right.
So we have people like Charles White, who we know is a phenomenal painter as well, that has come through the Southside Community Arts Center, Elzir Couture, all of these fabulous people, Dr. Margaret Burroughs, was associated with, and their colleagues, as you mentioned before. And so this is something people don't know about as well, and that is that a lot of the African American artists who attended or graduated from the Art Institute of Chicago would come back to the Southside Community Arts Center and teach classes there for free.
Right.
So the 3rd floor, when it was first built in 1892, I know, we're going on 125 years old.
Oh.
Yes, and it was built by Gustav Hallberg, a German architect at the time. And at the time it was built for George Seaverns, which was he was a grain merchant, and that's how he acquired his wealth. Well, that single family lived in this mansion, this 3 floors and a full basement. And they were there from about 1892 to about 25. And then the Depression and all of that took a toll on those who were making a lot of money, and a lot of the millionaires up and down Michigan Avenue lost a lot of those mansions, right? And what I'm getting to is the fact that our ancestors now had a vision. And I'm just so proud that they had the vision of understanding that African Americans needed their own place to come together, to gather, to create. And it was really important because there were no galleries that were allowing African American fine artists to hang their work. So due to racism, we had to do it for ourselves, which I think turned out to be the best thing. Yes, a very positive thing.
We turned it into a positive.
Yes, we have.
Right.
Yes, we have. So, yes, there are 3 floors. On the 3rd floor, it used to be a ballroom when a single family had it. now is our creative space where we have our painting classes, our acting classes, and dance classes for the most part. So that is where I saw Kuumba Workshop for the first time perform and rehearse. That's on the third floor of the Southside Community Arts Center. And on the second floor, we have a gallery in our offices. And our second floor gallery is now named after Elzir Couture. Elzir Couture and Margaret Burroughs were the longest living founders of the Southside Community Arts Center. And of course, you know, we lost Dr. Margaret Burroughs, or she made her final transition in 2010. And Elzir at 93. And Elzir Couture made his final transition in November of 2015, and he was 99. And both of these elders we could learn from and be motivated by, because they were just so energetic and still making a positive difference up until their last breath. It's just amazing.
Energy is one of the things that you should always associate with Dr. Burroughs, because she had boundless energy. She bowled, she roller skated, she was active, she was in everything. I don't know that she ever drove a car, because very often I picked her up or dropped her off, and so did my daughter, and I'm sure other people did. And my daughter also marveled at her strength. That she could be carrying something and you would take it away from her and it would nearly take you to the ground. It would just weigh you down, so heavy. She was a healthy person. She had some very good advice for you. For example, she always talked about eating right and not eating too much. She always, when she traveled, which of course we know that she was a worldwide traveler. Does that account for your interest in the globe?
Well, I would say not, but it was her travel, of course, encouraged me in terms of understanding that it's okay for me to want to travel the world. My mother will tell you that ever since the age of 9 and 10, that she can remember, I wanted to see this place and that place and this place on the map. So it is more innate, I believe, something that is creator given, that I'm an adventurer and I want to see as much as I can. My early days, I wanted to be an anthropologist. So that, of course, would allow me to travel around the world. I am so glad, though, that that is in me, because there's another kind of richness that one can gain from seeing things firsthand, seeing people, seeing other cultures, being able to communicate. I like what you said earlier when you talked about my name, Masequa, and the fact that it is West African. And I also think that especially people of African descent do not get a chance to speak other languages enough, and especially our own, because that was taken away from us through the slave trade. So we are one of the few people, if not the only people, that have been completely disconnected from our original languages. And so when I work with the teens, I do allow them to call me Ms. Masequa as opposed to Ms. Myers, because I want them to understand the difference in which words and sounds roll off your lips when you're not speaking English. And it is a very soft and melodic way of speaking when we use our African languages.
I don't want to start another show, but we could have a common conversation about naming. That is one of the central places from which our identities were stolen. And when you saw Roots and you saw Kunta Kinte, and you saw how he was forced to surrender his identity. A name is not just some sounds. A name is your history. A name is your kinship group. A name places you in the world not as it's a boy, but it's a girl, but it's a son. It's a daughter, which gives you a family, which gives you a history, which gives you all of the things that make up culture. So when names are changed, more than just you have to adapt to another way, another thing to call yourself, but you also have to adapt to another way of being in the world. And so it's very important that we understand that the worst thing that happened to us of all of the things that occurred during the African captive trade, because I refuse to call free black people who were stolen slaves. They were captives. So the worst thing that occurred, other than the fact that we were stolen from our homeland, was to change our name so we did not recognize the people from whom we were stolen.
Yes.
So when you travel, you notice some things. You need to have another perspective, because one of the things I noticed when I went to the first time I traveled out of the country. I traveled with Dr. Burroughs.
Wow.
That was who I was supposed to go with, because I didn't like flying in airplanes. I didn't like none of that stuff. But I figured if Dr. Burroughs was on the plane, it was going to stay in the air. Now, that's truly what I counted on. She was going to keep that plane airborne. And when we landed, it was such a different experience. But the thing was that Dr. Burroughs told us, don't take a lot of personal things, take things to give. So you were already instructed to come there with things to give to people, not come there with things to dress up in and, flaunt your Western culture, She was such a beautiful person, but the thing that the one experience I want to share is that there was a strike because they had what they call socialized medicine, which is simply an African way of life. And so when the doctors went on strike, all of the other laborers also went on strike, which meant that the lights went out. Every night there were no artificial lights anywhere. Had that happened in Chicago, we know the bedlam and pandemonium that would have attended that. There was no looting. There was no rise in crime. There was no rise in violence. The lights went out. We walked from the hotel to the restaurant. We ate by candlelight. We walked back, because it's not true that African people take advantage of opportunity to plunder and to do criminal activities. It is not true. I saw it.
Right.
You wake up every morning, the town was still intact.
Yes.
The marketplace was still intact. In fact, if someone stole something, you would hear all the people chasing him, calling him thief, and the thief would not want to be apprehended.
Right.
So I'm saying that we said crime is related to poverty. No, it
No, it's
isn't.
not.
70% of the people in Senegal were unemployed. They didn't have a high crime rate.
Well, that's because in this country, too, what we do is we equate money with character, and that is the complete wrong thing to do, because one does not have anything to do with the other. If it did, people with money wouldn't commit crimes. They wouldn't be unhappy. They wouldn't kill themselves.
They wouldn't be greedy.
They wouldn't be greedy. All of that is so true. So, unfortunately, when we say that other countries are poor, we're really often only talking about monies,
Material
things
things.
they've accumulated
Right.
or acquired. But when you understand life and spirituality and understand what is important in life, such as people who love you, just having enough to eat, having enough to wear. Excess
And
is
knowing
not
what
what we
enough
should be
is.
about. And knowing what enough is. That is so true. And so it's kind of just, not kind of, it's very distorted in this country.
Right.
Capitalism is out of hand, and white supremacy is still here, racism is still here, and what we have to do more of as a people is to understand that we must know who we are. We must know our history past the enslavement that occurred from Africa to here. And once we really understand that and really love one another, not just be tolerant, but love one another, because we have survived some of the most horrific
Horrendous.
atrocities ever to happen to mankind, in quotes, then we would be in a better place. That's all.
Right.
We would be in a much better place. And I really believe that art and culture has a significant amount of influence on how we see ourselves, because our artists are more like our storytellers. I mean, Dr. Margaret Burroughs was not only a painter, but she was a poet, and she was an author, and an administrator, and a teacher, professor. And I'm saying that to say that she taught us a lot. She brought so much to our lives to enrich it. And because of that, you have people like me, and those are my predecessors, and those are my successors, that will come and keep this legacy alive. It will never not be necessary, because as new generations are being born, they will need to be reaffirmed as we were reaffirmed. There was some talk about Dr. Margaret Burroughs being a person that really, in a way, was running away from her people because they saw too many white people or others around the Southside Community Arts Center, or who she interacted with outside of the Southside Community Arts Center. And I was perplexed during the time that I heard some of these comments. And this was years ago. And what I found out was this. This is my reality with Dr. Margaret Burroughs. And she also taught me Humanities 101 at Kennedy King College. I didn't get art from her, but I got humanities from her. This is what I believe people got confused on. And that is, she loved being of African descent. And she understood the magnificent, or the magnitude of being of African descent in terms of accomplishments and what we have done for the world. Not only did she want us to understand that, she wanted everybody to understand it. So she would tell that story to anybody who would listen, anybody who wanted to learn. She would talk about the African ancestral power and connection that African Americans had with Africa. So because someone wants to share what they know about our history to people other than people of African descent, does not make them non-loyal, for lack of better words, to their race. It just means that all people should understand and appreciate and relearn the greatness of Africa.
Well, now, you know, Dr. Burroughs talked about the universality of art. She in fact said there was no black art, but there was the unique art of black people. She was clear that she was a human being. She was clear about, sometimes we say it and forget it right away, that race is a fraudulent concept, that there is one race, and it is the human race. And if you are in a race, that's the one you in. So now that does not mean that there are not variations within the human race. Yeah. Dr. Burroughs was very clear about who she was, and anybody who could doubt that I would be suspicious of. some people don't understand character either, and you brought that up earlier. You know, it is not enough to just have melanin. You know, you just can't, I mean, it is not just enough to have an exterior that says that you belong to this variation on race called black. If you are not behaving, if you want to call yourself an African, then study Africans and find out what it was that Africans believed and practiced, and pattern yourself after that. Dr. Burroughs was a real model, not a role model. She was not somebody portraying something. I know you're in the performing arts. You know the difference between Masequa and the person that you are portraying. You know, you can make that distinction. Dr. Burroughs was a real model. She lived her life out in front of your face. Do you know that DuSable High School, where I went, had a preponderance of white teachers? Dr. Burroughs wore what they now call a natural, which was just her natural hair. She didn't ask permission to do that, and she didn't do it to make a statement. She didn't do it for any other reason than she was being Margaret Taylor Goss, or whatever her name was before she married Goss and Burroughs. So the thing was, you had to, if you're going to run with Dr. Burroughs, you had to meet her where she was, because she was not coming to where you are. And so consequently, she was comfortable with who she was. She knew who that was because she said, I have drunk deep of African culture. She knew who she was. She practiced being who she was. And if you had a problem with that, it was your problem. It was not her problem. So you go somewhere and deal with that and figure out who you are, because Dr. Burroughs certainly knew who she was. And the other thing about her was she validated other people. She valued human beings. She valued people of like minds. Some of the people that she associated with were doing things that some so-called black people would not touch. They were standing up and taking real risk. They were taking risks of their wealth, because some of these people had money, their positions of being ostracized by others of their peers.
Their life.
Listen, yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I mean, if you wanted to learn something about social justice and standing up from it, learn from the people who were on the front lines, who were being accused of being communists, being accused of being unpatriotic. I mean, there was just so much, there was so great a risk during her time to be championing the causes that were being championed by people who were looking out for people who could not defend themselves. Join her standing on the corner with a gleaner collecting dimes.
Well, see, that's where I was going to make sure that we revisited, because one of the reasons that the Southside Community Arts Center is where it is right now and still standing is because of some of the wonderful, fantastic fundraising ideas that Dr. Margaret Burroughs had and actually executed, and one of them was the Mile of Dimes. And there was that cup. People still do it now. The fire department and all kinds of institutions still ask for monies at the corners when we come up to a stoplight, right? Well, this was a fundraiser that involved Dr. Margaret Burroughs and all of those who would have that cup and ask for that dime to open up this art center. And not only was it opened at that time, it was also bought in the 40s as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another vision that our ancestors had
Mm-hmm.
and understood how important it was to own the facility in which we resided.
Mm-hmm.
And that is probably, not probably, that I'm sure is one of the reasons why it is still standing. And we really believe, and so did Dr. Margaret Burroughs, and you have explained it so well, about how she felt about people and how she would bring them into her life, and how she also thought that art was not just for the elite. Art was for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what your economic status
Mm-hmm.
was.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was very important to her that the Southside Community Art Center remain relevant to the community. That could be those living around of the art center, or those who have like minds that create community. And as a result of being relevant to the community, there are programs that have, I feel, that have kept the building open because of its relevancy. So we went into the jails. Dr. Margaret Burroughs
Talk
took
about
art
that.
to the jails and
Taught it in
taught
the
it.
jails.
And I also went in and performed and taught poetry and all of that in the jail system too, because again, we're saying that we want to improve the quality of life, not take a person who may have made a mistake. And in this country, it often wasn't because you made a mistake. It was often political why you were jailed, and especially in the 60s and the 70s, when so much of that was happening based on philosophy and not based on what is called criminality. But taking art into the jails just created another kind
Lifting
of
spirits.
wholesomeness and potentiality that came out of persons that needed not to be forgotten, but to be told and understood that they are someone still, and that they have a place to come back to. Might be some work we need to do, and we're going to do that work, but it can be done. So taking the poetry and the performances into the jails, I think, was just phenomenal in terms of lifting our spirits, as you were saying, and motivating us to do the right thing. We also have an open door policy, so when you want to come in and talk about issues, if you want to deal with social justice issues, the Southside Community Art Center is the place to come to. So it's not just doing art for art's sake, but it's advocating art to change and to make positive differences in our lives. So I am just amazed continuously about the generations that are being affected positively by being associated with Southside Community Arts. And I talked about how I was a teenager and how that helped shape my life. And it just continues. I just met, well, I shouldn't say I just met, but since I've been at the Southside Community Arts Center the past 3 years, I brought in an artist called Ramon Static. And he's 30-something. His father brought him to the Southside Community Arts Center when he was 12. And he just could not get out of his system that there were artists like him that were really making a living in painting. And here he is now, one of the most sought after muralists in Chicago.
Wonderful.
And he's teaching all over the world how to be a muralist. And so we are still affecting lives on a daily basis for the better. We just finished an exhibition last year called The Promise of Peace, and it was a youth-oriented exhibition. So young people from the age of 10 to 30 was involved in The Promise of Peace. And it wasn't just about, excuse me, gun violence or gangs or anything like that, but whatever violence that you felt had been put upon you, you could create an art piece as a result of that. So one young girl who's the age of 12 drew, it was a pencil drawing, of words that she needed to deflect because they were negative, and it was all about being bullied. And coming through this art project, being able to take those feelings that she had of inadequacy and fear and put them in a painting, a drawing that she created, she said just felt like an elephant had come off of her shoulders. And now she doesn't feel so alone. She can come to a place where people will actually listen to her and feel what she's been feeling and want to help her not feel that way again. So we are still affecting lives of 10-year-olds today as we affected lives 75 going on 100 years.
You sure know how to maintain a legacy, my sister. Well, as the daughter of your parents,
Yes.
you know, what else could you have done? And as the granddaughter of the Queen Mother,
Yes.
you know, what else could you be doing? And you just celebrated an anniversary and had the art auction and a big to-do down at the Southside Community Arts Center, and coming up will be?
Well, okay, we have an exhibition that is up right now. It's two of them. We're celebrating Black and all its diversity. So on our first level, which is the Burroughs Gallery, we have Black is Beautiful, which is a photography exhibition by Tony Smith. He has been...
I know Tony
yes,
Smith, of course.
He's been chronicling the African American community for a couple of decades now. He's creating a coffee table book with all of these beautiful images of who we are. So, but you can see a lot of those images right now at the Southside Community Arts Center. And he also says that it's a direct reaction to, it's a reaction at this point, to all of the media coverage I mentioned earlier that we're getting such bad press.
Right.
And we continue to get it in this country.
We have 3 minutes. I want to make sure you cover everything.
Okay, so, and on the second level, the gallery, Elzir Couture, we have Black Love Matters. So it's their paintings and mixed media of elders and mothers with babies and families. So it's really, there are 2 exhibitions that you must see. We will, we just finished, as you mentioned, our art auction. We have an annual art auction for the past 52 years. We haven't missed a year. We held it at the South Shore Cultural Center this year. So keep looking for our next art auction, which is September coming up. Of course, we're going to have Kwanzaa programs. We have film versations at the Southside Community Arts Center. So we take relevant films, we screen them, and we have a Q&A afterwards. So film versations, a film and a conversation afterwards.
Oh, that's,
yes.
I like that.
Yes, and we also will have an art collectors panel discussion. So how one can become an art collector and how important it is to invest in an African American
And
art.
how lucrative it is
It
to
can
invest
be.
in art.
Yes, it can be. So I just want everyone to know that I would love for people to visit our website, www.sscartcenter.org, and you can get all the details of what we're about right now.
Masequa Myers, you have done a wonderful job
Thank you.
of representing the Southside Community Arts Center. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you for having me. It's been a wonderful time with you.
I enjoyed this so much.
Thank you.
Came to have
We could just,
fun.
it just goes fast, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I knew I was going to enjoy this.
This is really
Yeah,
nice.
it was so hard to get you down.